I'm Dr. Sheila Dyer, and I'm a naturopathic doctor working here in Toronto. So first of all, welcome. And today we're going to talk about potassium. So maybe you've heard of different vitamins and minerals like vitamin C, vitamin D, magnesium, but maybe potassium is not one that you're as familiar with. Maybe if you're like me, you remember that bananas are really high in potassium. So we're going to go take a closer look at all the things that potassium does for us, and then kind of where we can find it in the diet and why that's important. So first of all, potassium is a mineral. It's also an electrolyte, which means it has an electrical charge to it. And that really is important in terms of how it functions within the body. So what does potassium do in the body? It really works on a cellular level. So it is involved in muscle function, in nerve firing, in digestion, fluid balance. It's one of the most important minerals in the body. And when it's not at the right levels, it can also be one of the most kind of deadly minerals to be high or low in. So kind of looking back at my work as an ICU nurse, potassium was actually one of the electrolytes that we monitored really carefully, kind of either once or twice every 24 hours to just really make sure those levels are where they are needed to be. So why? Why was it so important in ICU? It's because of that muscle firing or the muscle contraction. So potassium is really needed for that muscle contraction to happen. And your heart is actually just a big muscle. So when your potassium is really high, one of the things that can happen to you is that your heart rhythm will change. That's actually maybe one of the things you might notice if you yourself have some sort of high or low potassium. So the other thing that I mentioned previously was fluid balance. So fluid balance, maybe you've heard that we're about 60 to 70% water. Well, all of that water is in different compartments of the body. So some of it is the blood, some of it is within the cell, some of it is outside the cell, spinal fluid. Potassium is actually really important to keep the fluid balance in the proper compartments. So we actually want most of our fluid to be inside our cells. That's where it's doing the work that it needs to do. So we do a lot of kind of fancy things with potassium and sodium, and we pump them in and out in order to get the right fluid balance. If you had the wrong fluid balance, you might have swelling or something like that. So that's too much fluid kind of outside the cell instead of inside the cell. So the other thing I mentioned was bone health. So not a big component of what potassium has to offer, but we do find that when you have adequate potassium, you don't lose as much calcium. So you're able to retain more calcium in your bones. So then the last thing I want to mention has to do with blood pressure. And this is where I kind of want to spend a little bit more time, because some pretty cool research is coming out that shows that potassium lowers blood pressure. It's a little bit more complicated than potassium alone. It's when we have higher levels of potassium versus sodium. So sodium and salt, same thing. But we all know that salt is bad, especially if you have high blood pressure, right? So if you have lots of salt, then you retain lots of water, and then you increase your blood pressure. So what we found in the research is that if you have a really good ratio of potassium to salt, that's where you get the most benefit in terms of lowering your blood pressure. So in the standard kind of Western diet, we eat a lot of processed food, a lot of fast food, a lot of things that are convenience, that are salty. All of that is going to raise your sodium. And then if you think about everything that's good for you, it probably has high potassium. So really I'm talking about fruits and vegetables. So if you think about kind of what you know about heart health or what you could assume might help lower your blood pressure, it's really all the fruits and vegetables. Eat more of that and eat less of the kind of packaged foods, right? All of the fast food. So intuitively it makes sense, but now it plays out in the research. So you really want, if you're looking for numbers, some of the research shows that if you can have 4 grams of potassium to around 2 grams of sodium, then you're heading in the right direction. So where do you get your potassium, right? So I've mentioned kind of fruits and vegetables, but do you really know what 4 grams of potassium really looks like if you were trying to eat that in one day? So I have a list. So this is what 4 grams of potassium looks like in one day. So you have to consume 1 cup of onions, 1 cup of celery, 1 avocado, 4 mini potatoes, 1 cup of spinach, 1 banana, 1 cup of mushrooms, 1 cup of blueberries, 1 cup of broccoli, 4 ounces of salmon, and 1 cup of coconut water. I don't know if you're thinking that's doable or completely unheard of, cannot be done. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think when you list it out like that, it sounds like a lot, but if you actually put that into kind of 3 separate meals plus a snack, it does actually become a little bit doable. So I bet you have no idea how much potassium you're eating. I certainly didn't. Maybe you don't know how much sodium you're eating. I didn't. There's this free, I think there's probably more than one, but the one that I'm familiar with is MyFitnessPal. And you can actually put in what you've eaten and they'll tell you. They'll show you what your potassium and sodium is at the end of the day. It's a pretty neat little challenge. I definitely am not hitting the 4 grams a day mark personally, so it's a little bit of an education tool to see kind of where you're at and kind of what to aspire to. So that's kind of the latest research about blood pressure and about potassium. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is kind of safety. Potassium is, when we talk about kind of potassium in the research, we're talking about potassium from diet. Potassium is not something that I would recommend as a supplement. And it's just because it has a tendency to, if you have high levels, and you don't have to have very high, it can really affect some of your primary functions, which would be your heart. So it's something that if we are supplementing, we also want to be monitoring blood work. So I would not supplement without adequate blood work. So basically I just wouldn't supplement. Don't do it. But if you have any more questions about potassium, and if you need some strategies in order to kind of add more to your diet, maybe you want to reach out and make an appointment with me, or shoot me an email. So all the information is down below, but thanks for listening. Be well.